Good morning, kiddos. So today we are going to be talking about a little bit more in detail what the Constitution has written in it, kind of like an overview of how the government is organized and what the goal of that document was. Okay, so the writers of the Constitution, once they had already signed and approved that we talked about yesterday, was an important sentence called the Preamble. Okay, this is what it begins with. So the Constitution is like this document, this official document that these writers wrote to talk about what the government looked like or what it's supposed to be organized as. So it begins with this preamble, and I'm going to read it to you. And it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." And basically, that sentence just explains that the government gets its power from the citizens of the US, and it's also going to list the goal of the document. Okay, I'm going to can't think of the word. I'm going to kind of explain a little bit more, interpret. That's the word I was looking for. So I'm going to interpret a little bit because these are some fancy words that these people were using. So obviously, we, the people of the United States, they're talking about the citizens who live in the United States in order to form a more perfect union. So in order to make this country almost perfect, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, so kind of like peace in the country, provide for the common defense, so making sure that we are safe, and promote the general welfare, like being the good for all the people that live here, and secure blessings of liberty in order for our country to be free for us and our posterity. That means our future generations. Ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Okay, so the government power is divided between each state. So each state has its own individual power, its own individual laws and rules and things like that for each specific state. But there's also a national government, and we've talked about how that's different than the state government. The state government is only in charge of that one specific state, but the national government is in charge of all of the United States. Okay. A government that is based on the division of powers, so the division of the state and the national government, is called a federal system. So our country is under a federal system because it's divided between the state that you live in, but also overall the United States also has a government. Okay. Both national and state governments can make laws and collect taxes. So for example, here in California, California can make its own separate laws, can collect taxes for California, but the national government also has laws that we have to abide by, and they also collect taxes. The state governments have control over more specific local matters. So for example, how old you can be when you're married, how old you can be when you start driving, what subjects need to be taught in school. So each state can have its own separate rules. So for example, in California, you can have the driving age be 16, but maybe in a different state, the driving age is a little older or maybe even younger. The subjects or the way that teachers teach the subjects in school are a little bit different. For example, here in California, we have something called California Common Core. But in Texas or in Mississippi or any other state, they have a different kind of rules of how to teach those specific subjects. Let's talk a little bit about how the government is separated. And the way that it's separated is called the branches of government. So there are there's a separation of the powers or responsibility that each section has, okay? And this prevents the national government from being too strong or for being too powerful and having too much power over the people who live here, okay? So we're separated into three different branches. The first branch is called the legislative branch, and this branch is the one that is in charge of creating laws. So they come up with ideas, they come up with different rules that they want the United States to follow, and it's separated even more. So I'm going to go through this little graphic here. So the first one is the legislative branch. So they make the laws, and Congress makes up the legislative branch, and Congress is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Remember, the House of Representatives is based on how many people live in a state, but the Senate, there's only 2 senators per state in every state. So there is 100 senators in the United States, 2 per state. There's 50 states, 2 times 50, 100 senators. But the House of Reps is like over 400 because every state is different. So, in more detail, the legislative branch passes the laws. They also approve spending. So, if the president wants to spend more money on a specific department, the Congress will approve it. Okay, they also approve taxes. So, if there's a new tax that needs to go in place, this is the branch or the group of people who pass all of that. Okay. Then the next one we have is the executive branch, and this is made up of the president. In the executive branch, the president's job is to enforce the law. So once there's a law that is made by Congress, it goes to the president, and the president has to approve it, has to sign and make sure that the people are basically following the law. Okay, so he's the one who's in charge of all of us. And then, of course, under him is the vice president. From there, we have the judicial branch. Okay, and the judicial branch, kind of like judge, is made up of the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, there are 9 appointed judges. And what their job is to do is to just settle maybe some issues that are going on between the states. But the biggest job that they have is to decide if a law is constitutional. Okay, that means that they need to know what rules are put in place in the document, the Constitution, and decide whether the law that is being passed is kind of following what the Constitution says. And if it's not, then they can cancel that law and say that it's unconstitutional and it should not be a law. And that process is called the judicial review. Okay, there's this game on Brain Pop. If you just click on this link, you can play it on your iPads, and it's kind of like a sorting game that helps you determine whether blank is a legislative or it's part of executive or judicial. So it's kind of a fun game to help you review this information. So you can click on it in the social studies slides. So after you finish watching this video, you can click on it in the slides and have some fun playing this game to review. So another thing that is super important in the Constitution is that the writers of the Constitution didn't want one of the branches to have unequal power over the other branch. So they didn't want the president to have all the power. They didn't want the legislative branch to have all the power, or the judicial branch to have all the power. Another thing is that this branch can't do the job of this branch. This branch can't do the job of this branch, and so on. Okay, so no branch can do another branch's jobs. For example, the president cannot create a law. Congress can't explain laws. Supreme Court can enforce laws. Okay, they're separated and evenly balanced. This means that each branch has a separate responsibility. Okay, it also means it's balanced, that it doesn't have more power than the other. So even though the responsibilities are different, the power that each one has is balanced, because the Congress can create laws, but they're not able to enforce the law. So they can't say, yes, for sure, this is a law. and you have to follow it. That's the president's job, okay? And even though a law is passed, that doesn't mean that this group can say, oh yes, this follows the Constitution, because that's the judicial branch's job, okay? I'm going to explain that a little bit more when I talk about the checking of each branch. So checks and balances, okay, we talked about the balance part, that each section of the government has a specific job and it's balanced, okay? But the checks part is that this system also means that the branches have the power to check the work of other branches and to make sure that each branch is doing its job and it's following the responsibilities of this job, okay? For example, Congress passes a law when both the House of Representatives and the Senate approves it by a majority vote. So let's say the House of Representatives want to pass a law and they come up with an idea, they write out a plan, and the House of Representatives votes on it. They get a majority vote. Then it goes to the Senate, and then the Senate says, sure, this is a good law, we'll pass it too. So that law is approved, okay? From there, if you notice here, it goes to the president. So now the next step is that the president has to sign it in order for it to become official. So the president receives the law and is like, okay, the House of Representatives and the Senate approve this law, so I'm going to approve it too. Okay, they also have, well, if that happens and the law becomes official, okay, and then it has to go here. But if the president decides to veto or to reject the law, then it goes back to Congress. And then maybe Congress can revise it, or they're like, we don't care if you reject our law, and 2/3 of Congress votes on it, then they can cancel the veto and it still has to pass, okay? This kind of helps, that little part helps, because if the president thinks laws aren't good enough just because he doesn't like them or he doesn't agree with them, but it's a good law, Congress is able to still pass the law, okay? After all of that happens, the Supreme Court can still decide if the law should pass or not, because they can interpret the law. They can decide whether the law is constitutional or unconstitutional. If it's unconstitutional, that means it doesn't follow the guidelines that the Constitution has. So if the law is unconstitutional, then it's canceled, okay? And it has to go back to this step, and maybe they need to revise it, they need to change a little bit, or start from scratch. So this game too is also from Brain Pop. You can click on it and play around with it, try to help understand the checks and balances part of our government, so you can answer this worksheet. Okay, so this is just a picture of it. I will upload, this is also going to be uploaded as a separate document in Google Classroom, so you can work on it there. You can use the text tool on your iPads. The word bank is here. Some words can be used more than once, so if you don't see it on here, then maybe you don't need to use it, or maybe you need to use it more than once, okay? Some of these words are a little funky, so let me go back and explain a little bit more what each of these is. So remember that the president is also called a chief executive or the commander-in-chief, okay? The people who work under the president are known as its cabinet. So like the vice president and the people that are part of each department are part of the president's cabinet. The president can be impeached. That means we take him out. And I think that's it, all the other words we've used. So go ahead and click out of the video. Tomorrow we'll be talking a little bit more about, let's see, what are we talking about tomorrow? We're going to talk more about who supported the Constitution back when it was written, who approved it, and a little bit more detail. but please make sure that you have this complete by tonight. Okay, I'll see you guys later.